Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of First Impressions. Today I'm working with a company that I actually haven't talked with that much before. So Playground XYZ. I'm going to do that for my English audience, my UK audience. That I'm excited to kind of learn about. And again, I think this is one of these tech pieces of technology that is going to help both the buy side and the sell side transact better and just I don't know, more relevant advertising at the right place and the right time. And to walk us through that is Ben Diamond, who's the head of EMEA at Playground XYZ. Ben, welcome.
Thank you very much, Rob. Thanks very much for having me on. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you talk through a little bit about the product? I know you've got some slides to show. Why don't you walk us through what you're up to and what you're focused on?
I'd love to. Right, let me share my screen. What we'd love to chat to you about today is the technology that Playground's created all around measuring and optimizing attention. So we've created this piece of technology, which is called the Attention Intelligence Platform. And what that essentially is a platform that provides us with a set of tools that we can give to both advertisers and publishers to essentially allow them to understand the attention that they're getting on their campaigns or on their website and be able to optimize the attention that they're getting on their campaigns or their website. So we have this kind of slogan that we refer to, making attention actionable. We're really a technology that you can apply to actual digital campaigns and to actual live environments with digital, less so of a research house and more so a core bit of advertising technology. Um, so kind of the reason why we're in this space, I suppose that, for people tuning in to listen to this, you probably would have heard about attention. It's being talked about a lot in the industry at the moment. Certainly a buzz topic in the world of media. And one of the reasons it's becoming sort of talked about so much is not really because people have suddenly realised that people looking at ads is a good thing. In fact, it probably in the world of advertising, like it's been around since the beginning of time in advertising. We always wanted people to look at the ads that we create. But what has advanced is and become more sophisticated is the way that we measure it. So with the advancement in technology around front-facing camera technology for eye tracking, with the advancement of the adoption of AI technology, and bringing those things together, brings us some more sophisticated tools, so we can just be much better at understanding attention in the digital world. With the other thing that I suppose is something why it's been looked at much more these days is because the way in which we consume content on sites has just changed. There's just more content available now across more devices. And people are generally looking at things for just less amount of time. We have less time to give to content and to ads and all sorts of things in digital environments. So the attention that we give is less. And at the same time, the ads that we're being exposed to is probably more than ever before. As users, we're just exposed to many, many more ads than we were 10 years ago. So what you're left with is what we kind of talk about as an attention deficit. So less attention to go around, more advertisers trying to get hold of those precious seconds. And this is the attention economy that is being talked about. And for advertising, at the advertising side of the business, the reason why this is becoming more interesting is because I think advertisers and like the brands are starting to realize that if you can be successful in this space and you can identify where you're getting the most attention and maximize that, then you're going to stand out over and above your competitive set.
Yeah, it's there's no scarcity of impressions or ads, and I only have so many hours in the day that I'm consuming content or looking at advertising, and it changes over the course of the day as well, right? Again, I'm very much in a utility mindset, and other times I'm looking to drift. I'm just wanting to be, the dopamine hit, if you will, that is the internet is such a great source for. So yeah, I think that this is such a key thing for us from both the publisher and the buy side to solve for, because otherwise we're not working together in alignment if we're not really thinking about attention. And to your point, measurement has definitely been lacking. It's not measured in clicks, right? It's measured in other ways. So love to learn more about what you're doing on that front.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right there, Rob. We've been trying to measure attention since the beginning of advertising. And in the digital world, really, that probably started with clicks, and then moved probably more into viewability, which is obviously the thing that the advertising, that sort of the demand part of the industry asked for. They asked all publishers, so look, we want ads to be as viewable as possible. And so obviously all the supply side of the market, had to adopt these technologies and ways in which to make ads viewable. And of course, without wanting to come through with just yet another metric, what we do think about attention is it's closer to what we all think about when we think about a successful ad. A successful ad isn't necessarily one that's just on the screen. A successful ad is one that captured someone's attention. And the example we give here is, this is obviously just an example of a site that, as you can see, fairly a few ads on there. We've got 4 different ads. They're actually, all these ads were viewable, but were they all getting attention? And were they all getting equal share of attention? Was viewability the right metric there for the brand to use to understand whether the ad was effective or not? And so actually, attention is really a much more qualitative measure. It helps us understand the quality of a piece of inventory, because certainly for publishers that want to monetize their sites, they should be monetizing the ads that get the highest attention at a far greater value than ads that have had the same viewability score, but obviously weren't getting looked at quite so much. So there really is there's also a value piece that's attached to attention outside of just viewability, which is fairly quantitative. So we talk about attention as a time-based metric, and really the definition we give to it is the amount of time in seconds that an ad was actually looked at. And what we think is interesting about it is, if you can measure people looking at ads and whether they were looking at it for longer than the average on a particular page or particular part of the site, you can start to understand ad relevance. So I'm looking at this ad longer than normal people normally look at this ad. That's interesting. That shows that I'm more interested in that particular ad at that time. And really, that is kind of a core difference between attention and viewability. So where viewability is a good metric to be able to understand if the ads made it onto the screen. And obviously, all your publishers will be using viewability to make sure that they're sort of almost auditing the placements on the sites. Actually, what attention can offer right back into the mix is, we say it has a feedback loop built into it. And that's really important. I'm going to come on to talk about why that's important for publishers in a minute. But essentially, if you can understand that users are paying attention to a certain ad on a certain bit of context, then you start to understand so how well delineated those two things are. And so in this example we give on the page, you've got, for instance, this particular ad slot on an L.com page, and you've got 3 different ad creators running in exactly the same ad position. Well, they're all going to get the same viewability. So you're not actually learning anything about how well did the creative resonate with the users who are reading this page. Don't really learn anything there. With attention, we see it being much more variable. So you would see, for instance, an Estee Lauder ad getting much more attention on this page than potentially a pickup truck ad. And the fact that we've got that feedback that's coming from users is really interesting. And both advertisers and publishers can do some things with that data. And there's some clever things that I'll come on to in a minute, and how we can sort of the use cases for that type of data that we get back from attention.
Yeah, I want to see that. I was like, I have questions, but I'm gonna wait. I want to see, because in my mind, again, I'm already sitting there thinking about feedback to a buyer about the creative, right? Like how this could just really help creative, to just obviously setting benchmarks, understanding kind of what works, what kind of ads, so forth. So there's a lot here, and I agree. Viewability is solved. We're still trying to make sure that the ad gets seen, and so forth. And so this could be a really important measurement.
Absolutely. And the thing that really is important at this point to say is kind of like, does all this, does it mean anything? Are advertisers, are they really caring about attention as a metric for success? Because it has to link to their outcomes. No marketing managers are waking up in the morning and thinking, oh, I hope my ad's getting looked at today. What they're thinking of is, I hope my message is getting awareness and people are remembering it, and ultimately people are going to go out and buy my product. So really, is there any is there a tight correlation between people looking at ads and people then being aware of the message and remembering them? Well, we've done at Playground, we've done a big piece of research around this. We do continuous pieces of research around this. And we're not the only people in the industry. There's actually a fair amount of research that says the same thing, which is the longer that people spend looking at ads, the more effective they end up being. And there's a real direct correlation between a brand's outcomes with the amount of time that users spent looking at the ads. So that's just a kind of good thing to know, that this isn't all just a sort of a buzz metric, a new thing in town. It's actually got some really tightly correlated effectiveness to those outcomes. Rob, I'm going to just explain now how we do this thing, because I think I said right at the beginning that how attention is becoming more of a topic in the industry is down to really the advancements in the technology. And I'll just quickly explain very top line how our technology works, because it uses two core bits of tech that allows us to do this thing at scale. And the first thing that we use is eye tracking technology. And like I mentioned earlier, we've had some big advancements in the last 3 years around eye tracking technology, and the fact that we can now use it with front-facing cameras on the devices. So we have created our own eye tracking technology, and it sits within panel environments. And we have panelists come in and cruise through the internet, and we're able to understand how long they're spending looking at ads. And what this does is serves as a deterministic data set. Essentially, it's our source of truth. And what we use that source of truth to do is train models, predictive models for attention. And this is where our second piece of technology comes in, AI technology. And essentially, the AI is able to use to basically look and observe all the activity that's going on in our panel world, where we have thousands of panelists coming through and consuming content. It's able to see all of the things they do when they look at ads, and is able to learn from that, and is able to replicate that out in the real world. And that's really important, because when we're out in the real world, where we don't have access to cameras at scale, but we do have the ability to predict attention time based on all the users' behavior, how fast they're scrolling and where their mouse is and how big the ad was and how many ads were there on the screen, all these type of things that we're able to collect. Using AI technology, we can now sort of almost reenact looking, but without the requirement of a camera.
Very cool.
Yeah, and it's quite sophisticated, but this is obviously the way in which data now is being handled. And certainly, as we sort of move towards a cookieless future, using AI combined with signals is now sort of the way in which the industry is going in terms of understanding data. So what you end up having here is a piece of technology that publishers can use across their sites. It just comes in a form of a tag. They put the tag down onto the site, and it's able just to measure the attention that the ads are getting across their site. And we've got a few use cases here, which I thought would be quite interesting. And before I mention those, obviously, we're working with lots of partners across the globe. What we're seeing now is that big agency groups and big brands themselves are now starting to really look at attention as a metric for the future. So there's a lot of interest coming from the demand part of the ad industry. But how can publishers use it? So this is coming on to the bit where I promised that I was going to show you how you can use some of this stuff on the publisher site. So what we think is interesting, there's three different use cases that we think are kind of interesting to call out. Well, the first one is what we would call is like network scoring. And this is where you would take the technology and run it onto your site. And what it would do is it will start understanding the attention across all the different placements that you're running on the site. So you can use that for an understanding of quality control, like which ads on my site are getting the most attention, because I can obviously use that. I can start maybe marking that up commercially in terms of the value they drive, etc. And also I could start to use it to potentially see that, well, there are lots of ads on my sites that whilst they might get maybe a good viewability score, potentially they're not getting a great attention score. And that's obviously a bit of a red flag. And whilst the demand part of the industry is not calling for that swap just yet, it's coming, we believe. So it's a good time for publishers to kind of start to look at it and start to understand where the attention is coming from on the site. Of course, by using that as well, you could start to understand some data that you could maybe share to the market, share to your customers. So, trade marketing and insights that you could share, because you could say, hey, look, we get this much attention on this section of our site, and it's more, you get more attention on this section of our site versus this section, or these formats are doing better than these formats, and you can kind of like use that to like I say, to announce to the market, and also benchmarking for effectiveness. So that would be where you can start to create benchmarks of what ads are getting them are the most effective on your site. And obviously you start creating those benchmarks, then you can start to use that for when you're measuring campaigns, and basically coming back to the baseline every time.
Yeah, and to me, that's one of the things that I think is important for publishers to think through is getting ahead on knowing these things, right? So in other
Mm.
words, for them to sit there and spend time working on this, do it for internal purposes. See, again, go beyond viewability into what ads, what position, all these things, like all of this becomes something to analyze and understand so that you can correct if you find that you're not seeing things that you need to turning around and then being able to sit there and go out with benchmarks and have something, a narrative to tell, right? Which is more than we've got high viewability. If I can sit there and say we do really well in terms of this attention, these attention metrics, I think it becomes a sellable, tool, right?
And also, Rob, I think we all learned, the industry learned something from viewability the first time round when this all happened with viewability. Was it really it went out through the demand part of the market first, right? And then the advertisers suddenly developed these benchmarks for viewability, and then it came into the world of publishers, and they probably were a bit behind the advertisers and the agencies at that point. And I think it was quite a painful experience, really, for the industry as a whole. I think this time round with attention, it's really good really good time to kind of come at this at the same time. And to your point there, so start to do some testing and learning of what's working on the site, because we do think it's pretty inevitable. Like there's not many brands that we speak to who sort of would say, oh well, actually viewability supersedes attention. Of
Right.
course it's it's they see it's a natural evolution. It's obviously it will take its time to get up to the level that viewability was used for, but it will get there. So it's a really good time to kind of get out in front of it and see what works across your sites, and maybe make some adjustments, in time without having to rush it, and show to clients that you're looking at it at the same time that they are. And the other thing that can be useful is actually on campaigns that publishers are running. So there will be agencies and brands who will be using this type of measure themselves potentially, but what it can be used for is to proving that the superior value of inventory. So able to sort of show off back in post-campaign reports. Hey, look, your campaign delivered out in here, but did you know that you're getting loads of attention over on this part of the site? That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Or these were the particular formats where you were driving the most attention, and so all this sort of feedback enriches reports that go back to the client and gives this additional insight, quality insight. We also think that it's interesting that's that feedback loop that I mentioned earlier, the feedback loop on relevance across sections and sites. So this is kind of interesting that, like I was saying before, you don't get a feedback loop of viewability, but you do get it off attention. So you can start saying, hey, Mr. Brand, do you know that your campaign was resonating the best across these contexts or across these sections on my site? Therefore, maybe next time when you buy, you should be looking to target more tightly around those contexts and sections, because that's where users were obviously resonating with your brand. There's also in that vein, there's also a really interesting way of using this to almost enhance or augment first-party data. So obviously publishers have got a fantastic amount of first-party data, and the attention piece can be used to try and like I say, augment with that and start to enrich it. So you could say, I've got an auto intenders audience here, but actually I can now wrap that up as a high attention auto intenders, and I can potentially sell that at a higher value as well. The other thing you can do with that is you could, because publishers will still have access to the first party cookie. And so obviously publishers can see, this is one of the great things about this movement for publishers, is publishers really now hold the keys to those first party cookies, and are able to identify people coming back onto their sites. Well, if a publisher is able to also measure the attention for all those users, and they can see that user 123 is looking at car ads mostly when they come onto the site, or users 345 is high indexing against fashion and lifestyle ads. They can start bucketing those users into sort of high attention users for lifestyle or automotive. So it really does, that feedback loop starts to become really powerful for the publishers in terms of how they can bucket those users.
Anything I can do to tell an advertiser a new take on what's run on my site is a competitive advantage, as well as it just changes the conversation, right? Again, from, to your point earlier, it's almost like viewability has been used almost just as like this. Yeah, it came out wrong, right? I think you actually really covered
Mm,
that really well. But to sit there and for me to start to change that conversation about my audience and the attention and what they pay attention to really can inform any campaign that I run. So talk more about
yeah.
context. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Well, also, I'll just say on that last piece, and by the way, you can kind of do this at the moment with clicks, right? But the problem with clicks is hardly anyone who clicks on ads. So you could today, I'm sure some publishers out there will be thinking, right, I've got the first party cookie, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create segments of people that I see come onto my site and click on autos ads, and I'm going to bucket them into a data segment of saying this person likes cars and an auto intender. The problem is so few people so few people click on ads that data pool is really small. Really, what you'd want is, with attention, you can measure on every impression, and it's non-binary. So it's not yes or no, attention yes or no. It's attention how much, which means you can start to understand. Like if you create on the attention time, right, you could create a circle around right at the top level of attention time. You can start bucketing those users. You're going to get a lot more users into those data pools than clicks, just because people will look at ads more than they click on them, essentially.
Absolutely.
So yeah, the last thing is context. So we've done a lot of work around how attention works with context. We did a big research piece around this actually, and unsurprisingly, the two things are really, really well connected. Like if the ads put in a context that's relevant for the users, they're more likely to look at it. And similarly, the other way around, you can use attention to guide a contextual targeting solution. So like I mentioned earlier, you could say to a brand, hey, I know you're targeting automotive because you're a car advertiser, but did you know outside of that people in sport advertising, sport content, were really looking at your ad, high index versus other contexts, and start to kind of provide these insights. So we feel that that's really, really interesting for brands, and so publishers can add that value. But also, what we can to help the publishers do with this technology is start using it to optimize. So using the tech, you can curate marketplaces. You can curate basically the best parts of your site for attention and sell that directly to advertisers. And that basically can be used to prove more powerful than just coming to your sites and buying it through open exchanges, which of course is a great way for advertisers to scale. But in terms of a commercial benefit, this is a great way for publishers to bucket together their best inventory and saying, hey, if you want to buy that, you have to buy that directly from me, and I'll give you that for a private marketplace or direct deal or whatever it might be. But essentially, the technology is being used at the back end to identify that best quality inventory.
Anything that helps you with my direct sold, I'll take. I'll get that as higher CPMs, as well as again the way that, again, it goes all back to the narrative. It's all about talking about the right things as opposed to just the minimalistic things like click throughs and viewability and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing really is, and this is probably for the bravest of the brave publishers out there. I think this will eventually happen. It's a big talking point in the industry around guaranteeing attention. Now, some publishers will say, well, we're never going to do that because the guaranteeing attention has got too many moving parts that's outside of our control, i.e. the creative. For instance, a bad creative will not get as good attention as a great creative. And the publishers seldom get the opportunity, or should I say never get the opportunity to have an input on the creative. So there will be some publishers that have that thought. But there might also be some publishers who say, you know what, I'm happy to do that. That gives me a competitive advantage over my other publishers in market. I'm happy to provide advertisers with an attention guaranteed product. And using the technology, sort of going back onto the left-hand side of the, where it says network scoring, publishers will be able to get a very good idea of benchmarking for effectiveness on their site. So starting to kind of create almost attention guaranteed products on their site from the benchmarking they have is going to almost mitigate the risk around a sort of a guaranteed outcome. So we kind of think there's many solutions that this thing can be used for. I'm sure actually, Rob, you might even have some solutions that I haven't covered here, but it's quite expansive in how you can use the world of attention. But these are just some things that we believe are probably the core commercial use cases for publishers.
Yeah, I'm thinking, and I'll give you one right off the top of my head, which is for a lot of publishers, we do the creative for these brands, for our advertisers, and for me to add an attention piece to it, and again, get really good at this, right? Allows me to sit there and think these things through, so I can again understand my site, again going to that narrative and so forth. This is really again, I love these things that kind of move conversations forward beyond again what we've talked about in the past and so forth. If someone wants to learn a little bit more, who do they talk to? What's the next step?
Well, come to myself or Rami Yarad. We both sort of are in the team speaking to publishers. So please reach out. The email addresses are up on the screen there. You can also go to our website and find some more information there. We have our research papers listed on our website. But really, just reach out. I mean, we're happy to have these discussions and talk about use cases, commercial use cases, and maybe even some ideas that that publishers might have on how they could use this to help them become more effective.
Well, I'm definitely going to download the research. That sounds like a good read. So Ben, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining us on First Impressions.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me.